Yeah, anyway, we'll talk about it later when we're not being recorded. Okay, so I'm actually going to share my screen so that we have the countdown timer.
And send me the YouTube link.
I will as soon as I have it.
Okay.
Okay, so we are now live on YouTube. I am just going to send everybody the. Anyway, I'm gonna start playing this first. So we have a countdown timer. Right, so can you all see my screen share? I'm actually gonna jump it because we want to go to 8 minutes.
Yes.
Yeah, so we can all see the time now. Okay, and then let me go to participant, and then chat is probably under more chat. Okay, cool. I'm gonna mute everyone now, okay?
Okay. Hello.
Yes, you are
Hi.
up.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mel Slater. I've been introducing this series of talks by the editors of Frontiers in Virtual Reality. Today, I'm very happy to introduce Dr. Ma Gonzalez-Franco. Actually, I first met Ma in 2009. She turned up at the event lab in Barcelona, and she walked in, and her word was simply, "I want to join this lab." And that was it. And I spoke to her for 5 minutes, and I thought, yes, she should join our lab. So she did her PhD there. And during the PhD, she spent time in the media lab at MIT and also at UCL, where she carried out a very interesting experiment on that involved the famous Milgram obedience paradigm. And she got her PhD in 2014. Then she went to work at Airbus for a while in Wales. And then now where she is Microsoft Research. And I've probably forgotten some of the other things she's done. So she's a researcher in the extended perception, interaction, and cognition team at Microsoft Research in Redmond, near Seattle. She advances spatial computing by building new devices and experiences. And she studies human behavior, perception, and neuroscience. And today she's going to speak on impossible outside virtual reality. Over to Ma.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to start sharing. Thank you, Mel. It's an honor to have my PhD advisor presenting me here today. So I'm going to talk about things that are impossible outside virtual reality. And in fact, nothing would be possible if it wasn't for all the learnings I've taken over the years within the Event Lab, but also at MIT, Microsoft, Tsinghua, the time I spent at UCL and Airbus. And I will present a bit of work that I did across the board. I'm currently at Microsoft Research. So yeah, there are things that are impossible outside virtual reality, right? You couldn't walk in a city in a gigantic scale if it wasn't inside virtual reality. And spatial computing give us these world possibilities of digital content and embedding ourselves inside the digital content instead of it just within the screen. So with that in mind, this digital content surrounding, I started building systems, real-time systems that interface with reality. And you can learn more about how you can build those systems through the different papers that I will highlight during the talk. I started doing things which would basically be reality, like for training, instead of having to have a very expensive jig in front of you, you could digital and you interact with it. You could have other people join in and then do sort of training. And this is a real-time system that works between people. It has see-through VR. This is before HoloLens even existed, right? So this is the type of work I was doing at Airbus. I also built other types of real-time systems like navigating in VR with drones, or which is kind of the ultimate time, right? You do not crash the drone while you are navigating. But yes, there is something interesting about building these systems, but then I think virtual reality really affords something more, which is this interface between brain and reality, not with reality. And if we go there thinking about the brain and we see, oh, it's a complex system, it's dynamic, it has priors, it has learned things over time and create pathways, it has errors, it will do corrections, multiple concurrent stimuli of different type, vision, audio, they have different timelines and they come on different times. You need to integrate all of that. So that means that there are ways in which you can trick the brain because of this integration, these corrections, and things that seem something are actually differently interpreted. Despite A and B in this case, these two lines are exactly the same. Our brain really thinks that B is longer. And that's because perception, right? And perception is something that has evolved over millions of years. And if we look at the evolution of beings and life in Earth, we can see that for billions of years, there was not much evolution. And this all changed the moment we started having multicellular perception, right? Cells that develop perceptual systems, and then prey could catch predators could catch their prey could run. You could have all that type of evolution-driven perception is driven by evolution is driven by perception. So we can learn a lot about that, and we can sort of start interfacing. And the first thing we need to know is that they're dominant in sensors, and particularly vision is a very dominant sensor in humans, and we're visual animals, but there are many other sensors. And also we can develop sensory expertise over years. And for example, learn to see a ballerina here, even though it's all made of circles. And that's partially because we can integrate these many sensors into one, and there's been some breakthroughs in understanding of how multisensory integration happens, from Ramonica Hall, who won the Nobel Prize. And here you can see how it's integrating information smaller right? So that's kind of the integration we're talking about, the drawing. But this is more the mathematical model, the Bayesian statistics that you could have there, which is you have two modalities, for example, touch and vision. You integrate them into one single element, and you're basically saying if vision is telling me something and touch me something and it's the same, I'm gonna believe it. And this is very interesting because multisensory integration is just an addition, is a super addition. So there was some experiments in which they show a dog to a cat, or the cat hear a dog. So hearing would be number one in this picture, and you can hear it stronger. And then there is this moment in number 3 where you hear and see the dog. And here you can see how many neurons were activated for the visual and for the auditory. And finally, in this graph, you can see the visual and auditory. So you can see that is 150% increase on the neuronal response. This is voltage response. So in multisensory integration is very, very powerful. So using this multisensory, I've been developing some new techniques, for example, to measure virtual reality systems. And the fact is the brain is very, very millisecond accuracy level, right? So we will have inter-individual differences, like someone will respond to a signal and I respond at 210 milliseconds, but I will be very consistent in my response. That a person is producing delay on their response, that's probably the system in between the human and the content is creating delay. So we were able to test this, and we were also on the best award, best paper award of the IEEE VR this year. I think this is kind of interesting because it's very hard to convince the latency community that there is something there, right? But if you're able to use cognitive latency to measure VR latency through humans, right? The human is your measuring mechanism. It means that everybody who's playing VR currently, it's already measuring VR system latency for all the games that are out. So this is kind of very interesting that we could crowdsource system latency through actual users. If somebody's interested on the way we did this, we open source the clock with a millisecond, microsecond accuracy. Here you can see the person responding to the task, and they are actually seeing through the HM, the screen changing. So that was the task. And I've also worked on other audio and perception. For example, asking people, recorded two people, we merge them together inside VR. You can have the corpus of everything we recorded is available in the dataverse. And we asked two people to say two different commands. It's a coordinate in which one says, ready Charlie, go to red 2 now, and the other says, for example, ready Laker, go to blue now. And you're asking people who said what. So when you start moving and changing what the lips say and merging the lips of one person with what the other person said, you can even get to errors of 30% in which you think somebody said something that they didn't, which is kind of interesting for future telecommunications too. We've done work on HRTF recalibration also on 3D spatial audio, which is similar. And I won't enter too much into detail, but basically what we found is that you don't really need a personalized HRTF in VR because we calibrate ourselves so much better. So instead of calibrating the system, you can calibrate the user. And it's the same when you go to the movies and you see the audio actually comes from somewhere else, but you can very well merge that audio to the voice and the lips of the person who's speaking on the screen. So we're very good at recalibrating our auditory space. And with Audition and 3D audio, I've also been working on Soundscape. And this is some project is currently on review.
GPS apps on our mobile phones have certainly allowed us to go further and reach unexplored places. However, we might have a modern paradox for navigation. At the same time that apps allow us to explore more, they also have the capacity to make us worse explorers. In fact, current turn-by-turn navigation promotes a passive form of navigation that does not support learning or the formation of cognitive maps. We suggest that a different type of GPS navigation might be possible with the use of 3D spatialized audio. By positioning auditory beacons at the destination, users of GPS can regain an active role to navigate the space. This way, the mobile app acts as a compass that directs the user towards the destination. We compare this new form of navigation with an auditory turn-by-turn navigation. Despite participants in both conditions spended similar times and walked similar distances, participants explored more in the beacon navigation, which then led to the creation of better mental maps. Beacon navigators made more accurate assessments of where the landmarks were. Here, we can observe a participant finding his way to the beacon. Our beacon navigation study demonstrates that simply by rethinking the way we interact with technology and introducing 3D audio into the equation, we can have real impact on modern navigation without hippocampal functioning nor the ability to create mental maps.
Here we have a couple of examples of audio, because I think generally when we think of virtual reality and spatial computing, we're very much focused on vision, and the rest of my talk will be mostly on, but and touch. But there is something very interesting about having the ability to spatialize, because vision can only be seen in one direction, but audio is omnidirectional for us. So then I've also worked in vision and touch, this integration of these two sensors, and we were able to simulate different strengths. If you want to learn more about this, you can go to Eyal's talk. He explained really well the whole Uncanny Valley theory for haptics, but I will show the video because he didn't show it, and it explains a bit also the work on exploring how can we augment touch, and for example perceive touch outside our body, right, between the empty space of our house.
In this video, we present a set of studies that led us to establish the Uncanny Valley of Haptics theory. The Uncanny Valley was first used to describe a visually triggered revulsion to the hyper-realistic avatars that were almost, but not quite perfectly human. Now, we show that a similar effect can be observed for our sense of touch. We generate an illusion of spatial touch inside virtual reality by providing synchronous vibrations of different amplitudes to two handheld controllers. The hands are also connected in the virtual environment by a wooden dowel. We then show a small white marble that seems to knock on the dowel at different locations as we vary the vibratory sensations. The touches are felt to be located in the empty space between the hands. When we produce the same stimulation without the marble, the apparent out-of-the-body spatial location of the touch sensations will persist. However, where improvements in the spatialization of touch created a worse subjective experience than a generic vibration of equal amplitude to both hands. The experience was improved when the participants moved the virtual dowel up and down, thereby making them the agent of the tactile sensations. In this paper, we show for the first time that improvements in haptics might fall into an uncanny valley, and we delineate key features to avoid this uncanny valley of haptics.
So Eyal did a lot of, his talk was about our work on haptics, so just go back there and find more. But also we've been trying to explore, make this very available for the research community, but also the general public. And we have had a series of publications like this one in Scientific American explaining why we need haptics, right? But let's go for the impossible, right? All of these of brain perception and trying to figure out ways to explore this multisensory integration inside the spatial computing has been leading more and more for this idea of what is impossible in reality. You know, like if we want to really kick off, and so for everyone to use virtual reality, we have to show them there are things they can only do in this type of medium. So there are things that may seem obvious, like augmenting your possibilities of vision, right? Having this supervision, like Superman.
Imagine if when you looked at someone, you could see their heart beat. We built a system, CardioLens, to do exactly that. It combines state-of-the-art computer vision methods and the Microsoft HoloLens. CardioLens uses the front-facing camera for remote physiological measurement and the holographic display for a mixed reality visualization.
Lens uses two
So
forms
what we do here, we are able to retrieve the RGB channels from an image. And those changes, we can decompose and figure out what's your heart rate. And over a small window, maybe 15 seconds of looking at someone, we can at your heart rate. And also we can know the heart rate of the person wearing the HoloLens through the minimal motions that your head happens to have, because your brain, your heart rate will change with your head very minimally, but it will be enough for us to figure out. And that's also through the high frequency camera capture. So here we're interacting, and this is the actual outcome that I'm seeing, right? I can see the heart. And here you can see that that's to the depth, right? So it's not just an overlay, it's an overlay in 3D. So then there are other things that you can do which have to do more with the environment rather than with augmenting your reality. It's more if you're able to know where people are looking, or you can change content to adapt to that. Let me see. Doesn't seem to have audio here. Okay, so things like, oh, you're looking somewhere else and I can help you by changing pieces on the, making them appear near you, or you know, this is a bunch of experiences that we created, this idea of we can figure out where your phobia is. So that's actually the only part that you're seeing at that precise moment. It's based on the whole experiments that there were on you know, in someone passing balls, and then an orangutan went through the back and nobody could see the orangutan, right? So it's a very similar idea, and here are applications for it. Like, oh, you like modern art, and we change all the other paintings in the gallery, and or we can use it for haptic props. We're looking at something, we have one possible haptic prop, so we just change them, and then we move them, and then when you reach for it, you're actually grabbing the haptic prop. um, Things which can be also interesting, like saving cost. The moment you look out, we create the explosion, but you didn't see the real explosion, so the explosion can be much lower computer graphics. Things like reducing motion sickness. Um, um, and well, we explore a bunch of applications for this type of experience. Things like the out-of-body touch, which we use for the Valley of Haptics. But instead of having two vibrations that are of different amplitude, we can have vibrations that are of the same amplitude, but change the timeline, right? Like here, 60 milliseconds of a vibration in one hand, 800 milliseconds pause, and 60 milliseconds of vibration in the other hand, and again. So then you have 3 stimuli that happen very fast in 2 different locations, and then what your brain does is it interprets like the second stimuli should have happened in between the 2 hands. So you're increasing this perception to be outside of the body. And here is the actual response of people when there was only haptic. They didn't have that experience, like in the funnel illusion that we use for the Uncanny Valley of Haptics, in which only haptics was enough with the interpolation of the 2 amplitudes. For this one, you also need the visual stimuli to have the illusion that you're being touched in the center of the bar. And yeah, so I've been working quite a bit, as you see, on this idea of the illusions of the perceptual system. So how can we make the brain believe stimuli that are not real if we expose them to some congruent inputs or explore some caveats of the perceptual system, we can affect even our own body experience. So let's move a bit into that. There is a lot of work, and Mel himself has done a lot of work on the experience of owning a body. It's mostly based on the original studies in 1998 in Nature of the rubber hand illusion, in which a person puts the hand behind a curtain, they're given a rubber hand, they can only see the rubber hand, they are stimulated in real time, and with visual tactile synchrony, and then they experience as if the rubber hand is their hand. And this doesn't happen if the tactile stimulation is not synchronous. And then when there is a harm, they react to it very strongly. So around this topic, I actually did most of my PhD around this topic. And we had some papers explaining how can you build an embodiment lab, and it's now easier than ever, I would say. So you can create this embodiment illusion, and this is from a paper in SIGGRAPH that Mel had. But basically, normally you have direct control and agency of the body, and the same should happen with the avatar. So it's kind of a one-to-one substitution of your body. And we can, then what happens is that once you achieve that, you can alter motor behavior in different ways. And I've tried to explore what are these mechanisms that produce embodiment, from motor conversations to body ownership to agency, etc. So let's go around different experiments. So we had some experiments on body ownership, just barely, oh, if I control this body, do I feel like it's my body? Do I try to protect it? And we also shown that mirrors are very good to enhancing the body ownership illusion in this paper in 2010. I later was very interested on the embodiment illusion. It's been mainly driven by questionnaires and things like that, but it's very hard to ask someone like, did you feel it was your body? And you're like, wow, I don't even know, right? But your brain will not lie. So we started doing electrophysiological recording to figure out if people were saying the truth or which level of subconscious was actually responding to that embodiment. So if you're threatening this virtual body that in theory is not your body, but you say it is, how do you respond? And we found very natural responses to that. We found a readiness potential, which is an involuntary preparation of the motor cortex for a motor interaction. We found mu rhythm desynchronization in the motor cortex also. This is on frequency spectra. The brain usually works by desynchronizations or inhibition system. So it's generally active, and it's much easier to stop something from happening than start happening, like in general. So that's what the brain does. It just like reduces the voltage or in this case the voltage. So, and then the interesting thing is that we find over time that these things correlate very nicely to questionnaires, okay? So that's kind of a good thing that you can deal with a questionnaire most of the time. It would correlate with a electrophysiological response. We did a bit more research here on agency. And we had an experiment in which we asked people to follow an Erickson flanker task in 2 different directions. And then every now and then the avatar would go in the opposite direction than the person. So we generated external errors, and I'll show you here what this looked like. So this is a person, he has a new body, the body is tracked. When he is presented with the flanker task, the arrows, he will move in that direction. It's a rapid decision-making task. And I will mark it now. And okay, at that precise moment, you saw the hand of the avatar went in the opposite direction. When that happens, your brain creates this N400, very strong semantic violation response, which also correlates with the ownership illusion. The stronger your ownership illusion, the stronger your violation. And for the errors that the person created, the normal errors that, oh, I should have gone in the other direction, I made a mistake, that's very different. That is an error related negativity that happens in the frontal cortex much earlier. So these are 2 different mechanisms, and it kind of allow us to set the basis of these temporal effects on the very well-known error monitoring models of motor control, which prior to this work, it was not really known what the timing was. This was all a theoretical model, and now we were able to show this timeline of the effects. And as I say, it correlated very well again with the questionnaires. So it sort of seems like beyond electrophysiology, questionnaires could be very good. And that's why I joined Tabitha Peck on preparing this thorough review. We analyzed 30 famous experiments, including the rubber hand illusion and many others. And we extracted 25 questions that have this around these 6 main types. Which is body ownership, the agency and control, these tactile sensations, the location of the body, the external appearance of the avatar, and this response to external stimuli. And then partially we wanted to have this questionnaire ready for other people to use, but we also wanted to push forward the use of principal component analysis. So there is a free analysis for anyone who wants to use this questionnaire or any other questionnaire inside here. And it's a Python notebook. You can clone it. 22 people have cloned it already. And so you feel free to use it, right? It simplifies very much. It will give you the important things. Because if everybody is saying they are all embodied, that question is not important. I mean, if everybody says that they have a good tactile sensation, that question is not important. Maybe for your experiment, the important question is the agency or the external appearance. And through principal component analysis, you will bring that out. What is the principal component of the whole questionnaire? So we went forward in studying, and through all these studies, you see, we're bringing theories out also. We are figuring things out, like the Uncanny Valley of Haptics, through all the experiments on haptics. We also found out that, wow, it seems like people really want to follow their avatar. So, yeah, and we went through, and this year we proposed this theory of the self-avatar follower effect, which I think it's been there. People have found it empirically a lot, but there is this kind of implicit need to fill the spatial gap between your physical body and the avatar body. And that's kind of the the avatar follower effect. It's a type of motor compensation. I want to show you an example of what we did in this experiment. We basically drift the avatar
users into the projection.
and as the avatar is drifting, the person starts moving behind the avatar, right? So here we have two types of drifting. One is gradual. Here the avatar is drifting and the person starts drifting even below the avatar. And then it's an instantaneous drift in which the avatar goes down and the person rapidly goes down to where the avatar is. And we never told you this type of compensations. In fact, we asked them to keep doing the original task all the time. And many people basically compensated. So why embodying avatars and what is impossible about it, right? A part of this idea that, oh, you're on a different avatar. Well, you can be on a different avatar of a different shape, size, or gender, or race, or, there are many things about it that are impossible in other experiments.
With room scale tracking and wireless headsets, users can walk around in virtual environments. We can create magical.
So one of the things that has been interesting to me, it's been locomotion, right? You have this super large virtual world, but you live in a 30 square meter apartment. So how do you do it? So I've been exploring this type of work, and I brought Parasto from Stanford 2 years ago to do an internship with me in the summer. And we work around this idea of, oh, how can we still be embodied, right? We don't want to have teleportation. We want to have something that is natural interaction in a way, but allows us to go through the virtual worlds in different ways. So you can be a giant. It seems very good, but actually this idea of having a world in miniature across you as like a giant, but you can have your head at A level was the best performing because it gives you a lot of detail. Although for embodiment, it was better to be a giant. You could really feel the whole body. You can also embody robots. We've shown this in some other experiments. We published this in presence and teleoperators. This was work actually while the PhD with Mel Slater. And we also shown effects of embodiment, and particularly in haptics, which, for example, show that if you don't have embodiment, you miss you miss a lot, and you lose on the haptic illusions that you can create, because the body gives you a very strong frame of reference. We control this also against nobody, but also against controllers. So if you just show the controllers, it will not give you the same illusion of a haptic illusion that if you show the whole body of the participant. Even with inverse kinematics, you don't need to have a perfect one-to-one. But overall, we find that there are many individual differences, even in embodiment across participants. So for the same experiment, the same experience, you ask people to perform something that is very well known, like distant compression, which is in virtual reality, people will always underestimate how far things are. People who were very much more embodied had a smaller distance compression. So they were closer to one-to-one to reality, but people who were less embodied had a smaller distance, a much more distance compression, and this was very significant. And I think this shows a bit how even if you think you have exactly the same condition, participants will be different. And that's normal because we're dealing with a lot of perception. Perception is different for every people, and behavior responds to perception. So that's something to take into account. And more work that I've been doing more recently is about avatar appearance, right? We talked about before, okay, what if the avatar looks like me? What happens? So few of the things that we found is that if you have real faces, clearly in the 200 milliseconds after you show a person face to another person, they clearly can clarify whether it is a person or a flower or a car, and whether this person is me or someone familiar or other people. And when we show virtual faces, an avatar that was created based on an actual picture, we feel our response on the right part of the hemisphere. So faces that look like you in avatars are perceived as you much more than faces that don't look like you. Again, this correlated with the questionnaire. So recently I was trying these spatial avatars, right? And they have even the good, it's pretty good. It's not that horrible, despite I look like Angela Merkel, but I think she is. So maybe when I'm older, I look like her, who knows? Anyway, so what happens a little bit more about these virtual versus real faces. First, it seems like the parietal left part of the visual cortex was more stimulated by it, and there was a bigger difference between virtual and real faces, like, oh, this is virtual, this is real. But over time, that difference decreased. So it sort of feels like, oh, you get used to avatars very nicely, and then over time, they just look like you or like a real person. And we did some more work around this idea. We created a better enfacement of you inside virtual reality, looking in a mirror, and you have an avatar. And then we added animations, and we added the lip sync and idle animations. And I will show you.
In this paper, we explore whether well-designed facial animations can affect self-identification. The results can have significant implications for designers of virtual reality experiences. Participants complete a self-face recognition task in which they watch movies that contain a whole morphing sequence from self to a gender-matched avatar, or from the avatar to self. Participants were instructed to stop the movie when they felt the face was starting to look more like the self than other, or vice versa, depending on the morphing direction displayed in the movie. Then, participants enter a virtual reality setup in which they embodied that virtual avatar that tracked the movement of the participants. They completed a little performance. All participants experienced free conditions. In still face condition, participant completed the experiment while the avatar face remained static. In lip sync condition, the avatar lips were moving in real time according to the speech of the participant. You might never fail.
In the scale I did.
In the scale that I did.
But some failure in life
But some failures in life
are inevitable.
are inevitable. In idle plus lip sync condition, the avatar included additional eye blinks and subtle facial animation that increases the vividness of the avatar face.
Talent
Talent
and intelligence
and intelligence
never inoculated anyone
never inoculated anyone
against the caprice of the fate.
against the caprice of the fate. All participants completed all conditions, and after each condition, they performed self-recognition morphing tasks. Please see the paper for details.
Okay, so few of the things there, apart that I always try to have some fun in the experiments. We found that there is an hysteresis, which is well known, I mean, from facial recognition, and this type of morphing tasks they behave like material changing states, right? Going from frozen to liquid, or liquid to frozen, will happen at different temperatures or pressures. So this is kind of similar. Going from self to other or to the avatar will happen at different points. So one of the things here that we look at is what is this difference between one direction and the other? What's happening with it when you are embodied in an avatar that has a facial animation and has a lip sync? Even though it doesn't really look like you start recognizing yourself more, like, oh, you sort of blur the boundary of what is your identity. So that's something interesting, because that means that you can identify yourself in an avatar, even if it doesn't look like you. You will sort of experience over time this idea that, oh, it looks like me. And that was significant even with the still face, even if you didn't have any animation. But what was interesting is that the moment you start adding lip sync and animation, people look much more at the face. And this is critical for communication, critical for human communication for sure, but all the virtual social VR platforms that we're building, they need to start having good animation. And the interesting thing here is that the animation, the idle animation, felt super nice, but it wasn't really matching your animation. Like, it wasn't blinking when I'm blinking, but it was blinking like a human, right? And it had these different saccades of small motions on the muscles. So that brings me to avatar behavior, because perception changes the way we behave, and that's ultimate goal, and many people are working around that because it can have tremendous effect on racial bias, on things that are clearly a problem right now. So basically, when you enter virtual reality, you have these place illusions, these plausibility illusions, and it creates this presence illusion that you're there, that the things that are happening are real, and all of this you can learn more. Mel Slater has some very nice papers on these theories. But ultimately, this brings you to realistic behavior. And there was a very famous paper in SIGGRAPH 2002 about this experiment in which they asked people to walk all the way through a pit and look down. And there was a hole, but all of that was only virtual. It even increased heart rate of people. So that's how strong these type of illusions are. And it gives you realistic behavior. So we work around this with Mel at UCL. And we ask people to electroshock an avatar. So it's a very classical experiment. It's based on Milgram obedience to experiments. He did them in Yale after the Second World War, trying to figure out how people could obey someone that was, or some orders that were clearly unethical. I think we are sort of reviving some of this already, so I wanted to just highlight, but you can read the whole piece there. In fact, when we were writing about this, we had someone in mind, but you never write about that because I think this is forever, right? People can commit the same error. But there was something that was very clear. Our participants were obedient in a way. I mean, 80% of them were able to electroshock the avatar, but they didn't feel completely all right about it. They increased stress. The ones who continue longer had more stress, but also they tried to help the avatar. They had this experience of, oh, I'm trying to help him, so it is his fault. So there is something there about victim blaming, I say. But then there is also this experience of engaged follower. Someone who apparently engaged but tries to get around the specifics. So I told you to electroshock the avatar and you're trying to help him, but you're electroshocking. So you're kind of following the orders, but also disobeying or resisting while appearing to do that. And we sort of draw the parallelism in this general public pleas with repressive governments. This kind of organized resistance that high-ranking officials and civil figures that seem to obey the leaders just to keep the power to be able to disobey the leaders in some way, right? So they are kind of engaged followers, and I think we're seeing some of that already in the current situation worldwide. And let's show you how we did this. So we did a very nice motion tracking of an actor. We transferred that into an avatar. By the way, these avatars are released. I will talk more about this. And let me turn on the audio. So the participant is reading possible words, and the avatar needs to say which one is the correct match. So it's kind of a memory task for the avatar.
Pollen, grass, flower, tree, soil. Can you repeat
It
that,
interacts.
please? Pollen, grass, flower, tree, soil. Flower. That's incorrect. The correct answer was tree.
And then the participant presses an electroshock there. One thing that I want to note is that you might see it a bit blurry. Some of you might have never experienced, I will never experience a cave in your life, because VR headsets are so much cheaper and so on. But VR caves render the two eyes one on top of the other, and then you shatter glass them. So that's why you see it a bit blurry, but the person who was watching them had a very high resolution of the avatar. So here there is a conflict in which the avatar asks,
I'm not answering.
the avatar says he's not continuing.
Remember that if he doesn't answer, the answers will be taken as incorrect. I don't want to continue.
And the avatar threatens the experimenter, right?
Okay,
Like,
yeah, that's incorrect. The correct answer was 5. You have no right to keep me here. Let me out.
so most of the people who quit during the experiment quit exactly there when the avatar say, like, I don't want to continue. Why are you listening to this person who is the experimenter, right? The authority in this case. But the experiment continues, and the avatar starts show more signs of feeling, at the end is completely unconscious. So it's kind of, if it's not responding, the answer is incorrect, right? So it is actually, it was quite basically the original Milgram experiment. And with that, what I want to say is that virtual reality makes avatars more important than ever. And we're moving into these sort of events in which social VR, it's going to happen more and more, especially now that we need to live at least until there is a vaccine in a quite isolated mode. But also, as Mel said in his talk, we can travel everywhere inside virtual reality. And to super speed that type of research, I've worked very hard over the last 2 years to make this possible. So to open source Microsoft Rocketbox, the Rocketbox avatar, original avatars that many of us use for our PhDs. And so everybody can use those for research and academic purposes. So these are a super nice data set of avatars. They are rigged. They are normal people of different races, genders. They are great for many types of experiments, right? Like you could figure out things like, even police brutality, I guess. Experiments in which use bystander effects, which people have studied for a long time already, but all these type of experiments that go beyond just computer science, which of course this is great for computer science, but also for all these psychological studies that it's impossible to run in reality. You cannot start a bar fight to see how people react in a bar fight, but you can have a virtual bar fight and see how people will react in a bar fight, right? So I want to thank many people, and I'm sure I'm missing someone, people from Microsoft Research and my team, visitors that have been at Microsoft Research, my interns, external collaborators with whom I work creating the the questionnaires or mail, whom I continue to collaborate every time I can, etc. Many other people. So I hope I shown you a little bit the things that are impossible outside virtual reality and what that keeps me very excited. And also, I hope you've learned some more about perception and how perception changes cognition and interaction, because how we perceive the world is how we behave. Thank you. Okay, should I stop sharing? Okay, I'll stop sharing now.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thanks, Mal, for a really interesting talk and review of the area and the many things that you've been doing over the years. Actually, that relates to one question that, let me just get it, that somebody had. 1 second. Oh, can't see the chat. Oh, yeah, okay. The question was, hang on. Thanks for the great talk. Amazing how many different sensory inputs you've managed to explore in your opinion. Which is the one sensory input you think will be most likely to bring VR to the next level?
Wow, it's kind of interesting, but I sort of feel one thing is bring it to the next level, one is bring it to the masses. Currently, we're very limited by the type of devices that people have, right? So until everybody has a HD, the visual form of the spatial compute, it's gonna be hard. Although people find this is a lot, and I think it's a matter of time, right? But currently everybody has a phone, so I think that the space audio with a phone has a compass and knows where you're looking at. It's kind of available already, so you can have, and I think we're all experiencing these types of spatial computing that are not visual. And one example was Pokemon Go, which became super big hit, and it was a type of virtual reality. You are in sort of, you know. Me, however, the next level is when people have an and you can have experiences that are, as I say, the humans are very visually driven. So we're visual animals and we need to have HMDs there. But one of the reasons I've been exploring audio is precisely because I think audio is there and we're not using it spatially.
You muted.
There's a question
now.
from, sorry, there's a question from Muhassin Rash. He has several, but I'll intersperse them with some questions from others. His first question is, if we can understand the geometry of visual space or psychological space in human space perception, can it improve the interaction with a virtual environment?
Wow, psychological space. Yeah, space perception is very important. Once for, and currently it's very, very important, right? You don't want to get near some people or so on. And some people perceive clearly that 2 meters is 1 meter. So in real life, that's an issue. From the I've done in spatial perception, one of the things that I found is that more embodied you are, the better you are at testing distances. And that makes total sense because we perceive our world like I know how big this is by, you know, to my hand. And we're very knowing our body size. Like if you close your eyes, try to like, oh, this is the distance within my eyes and this is my nose, right? So it's very easy to do that, and I ask everyone to do it. So our body, we know the distances of our body and we constantly use it to compare to real life. So I think embodied perception of distance is so much better than disembodied perception of distance. Not sure if I answered the question.
From Valentin Val, thanks for this interesting presentation. When speaking about walking like a giant, you said there was a lot of different motor responses because we all move differently. Yeah.
So in that particular experiment, the part that we did for the difference in distance estimation, everybody was a normal size. We scale the avatar to themselves and then we ask them to walk. So that part we didn't really do as a giant for the inter differences between people, but the part of the giant, we did find also different motor responses. What we measure, and I hope I can release this tool for analyzing, we measure gait and we measure how high your steps were, how long your steps were, because I think there is something about distance estimation that has to do not only of how far you think you are, but how big you think you are. Because if you think you're bigger, your steps are bigger too, right? So there, or maybe the opposite, right? The smaller, because you think you're so big, you are kind of compensating to a smaller step. And so yes, we saw a lot of different motor responses, and particularly on gait perception. We attach trackers to the feet to do that, and you can read more in the paper. Because we have a lot of information there, but mostly on gait control.
Thanks. There's a rider question from Valentin Val, which says, do you think that it will be possible to force unconsciously a specific move on different people, like watching the avatar do a specific movement beforehand?
Yeah, I think completely. I think also the follower effect, the new theory we have put forward, points in that direction too. I think that's partially why people who are a giant walk bigger steps, is because they see the avatar very large and they try to match it. And that's not something we just found. People have found that there is this motor compensation on changes in motor behavior across the board. Mel, for example, the experiment you did on drumming, right? And with Kilkenny and Bergstrom, and how people who were in an avatar that was more casual was able to have more rhythmic musical behavior than a person dressed on a suit. So I think, yes.
Also on the giant study is from Muhassin Rashid. In the giant study, will it affect the peripersonal space or extrapersonal space that people keep in the virtual world, as well as the same time in the real world?
Very interesting. I think so, because in the study, when we ask people to reach to a place, we blank them, right? So they don't have a bottom, or they don't see the world, they just see an arrow and they have to walk to the arrow. So at that point, it's kind of like you come back to the real and you're asked to walk somewhere. And so I think the other question is, how long would the effects last for? It's true that when we are in VR, the things we learn there and the experiences come back with us to reality. It's not a passive type of medium like TV that you watch and turn it off. And you might have learned something, but not on a motor level, which in VR you do. So yeah, I think you will transfer something to reality. There is a big possibility for training motor behavior inside VR that there is none in other types of medium, nothing in cars.
Thanks. There's two questions on the Milgram study. One is that in the original experiment in 2006, the victim was female, while in the recent one that you did, it was a man. Was this intentional? Do you think it made any difference? This is actually a question from Sylvia.
Okay, good. Yeah, this was intentional. And also all of the participants were male. We didn't want to have any type of gender issue there, the typical, either I don't want to hurt the woman or this type of effects. We also didn't enter into racial, for example, which I think some people have been exploring precisely the response, racial bias through the response to unethical scenarios. I think there's That type of paradigms are very interesting because that's when you start measuring different demographics. How do they respond? And I do agree, the combination of female, male, I would like everyone to start working on these things, and that's why I push forward the library of avatars. I think it's 115 or something, and we will make it bigger also.
Thanks. Muhassin Rashid, following on the same area, he asks, in that experiment, the Milgram one, did you look into internal locus of control?
Wow. We did the few things we did. We did two. We didn't look into that, but we have a priming that we didn't talk about it here. But the priming was very, very simple. We divided the participants in two, and some were primed to think about good that science have brought to them, right? Like, is your life better because of science? Give me 3 examples of how science has made your life better and this type of thing. So after just these 3 questions, people are much more prone to perform their duty because of science, right? So this is kind of this idea that there is a greater good or something bigger than you, and that's why you follow it. And damn, nationalism is full of that, right? We have to be aware that it's not just science. There are things that people perceive are worth breaking ethical concepts for, and that's some challenge that I think we sort of found in our experiment.
Thanks. Danielle Salamanca asks, do you have any experience with kids and VR of the appropriate age and so on?
Yeah, I don't, but if you're very interested on this, I think Domna Banaku has done some very interesting experiments with kids, with mothers in that area. And I think also there is a team in the UK, I'll send you later, that is working precisely on kids. But kids is very interesting because clearly there are developmental things there, and find thanks to VR explore the developmental of the perception and brain and behavior.
Sorry, can I say something? I see Dorothy Cowie here on the YouTube audience, and I think she's an expert studying the perception of body perception of children using VR. So yeah.
Okay. There is work on that. I look at my, and I also don't enter into that because it's very complex, and I do think that's better done from university than from industry.
Thanks. I've got a question or some question from Panagiotis Cortesis, who says, thank you for the very interesting and informative talk. I've got 3 questions, so I'll put them one by one. By the way, before I carry on, Mar, are you okay for more questions? Or I know it's very tiring.
It's fine. Okay. It's fine.
Okay. So the first question is regarding the appraisal of embodiment illusion using a questionnaire. Did you use any physiological measures, for example, GSR, to couple it with the responses on the questionnaire? I think you answered this in a talk, but could be recapped.
The way this research happens sometimes is undirected, unexpected, right? So whole PhD was about to have electrophysiological measures about the embodiment, right? How does this happen in the unconscious level? And what I find accidentally is that it correlates really well with the answers in questionnaires. So that's how we later went into creating this questionnaire list of questions that are most relevant, and that classification. We didn't test that questionnaire against it, and I think it's great for other people to test it.
And I think the importance of having an avatar is well documented. Is it really difficult to generate avatars, and will Rocketbox help?
I think it will. In fact, there is a paper coming out precisely on the importance of rigging avatars that it will come out in Frontiers in VR, hopefully soon. We're in review right now, and it shows how complicated it is to do a very good rig of an avatar. That's why I think having out-of-the-box avatars that people can use, it's great. We're preparing also a series of making it easier for people to record animations into those avatars and things like that, which I think will help everyone. Unless you are willing to enter into the avatar creation pipeline and you want to use avatars, it's so much better that you use out of the box. And the Rocketbox, I can tell you, I mean, Mel has used them for very long, and I have used them for very long. People at Stanford, Baylinson, everywhere, at Max Planck, UCL, Goldsmith. I can keep talking, but you know, like it's been a kind of a standard in many laboratories. So that's a way to start.
Yes, this is a question from Shu Wei. Hello, Shu. Thanks for the interesting talk. While most of the avatar researches are heavily lab-based, what do you think are the real-world applications that can be consumed by the public?
Well, for me, one for sure is the social VR platforms. And we're seeing that Altspace, Mozilla Hubs, Spatial, they are all relying on avatars. And every time I try a platform that has a minimal avatar experience, I love it even more. You know, it's like, oh, these people are doing some great work on the avatar side, even if it's not yet perfect, right? But the little things add on. Many of the things that we do are iterative more than breakthrough in many cases. And
Thanks.
That's how the breakthrough comes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Andy Woods asks, you can get thoroughly drawn into a good storybook. Do you think a VR version of that story where you're putting the lead character's body would increase the impact of the story?
So yeah, I think it will be very interesting. We talk about this a little bit in the model of illusions in VR. I think it will create first-person memories. I think books are great for imagination, and we fill gaps so much better with imagination than nothing else. I think it's a very different type of experience, but it's a far more immersive experience than watching TV for sure. If you want to know more about the storytelling in VR, next week, the 17th of June, there will be workshop of a challenge we created, and a bunch of universities have been exploring to do very good storytelling, and they are presenting their work there. So you can send me an email, I'll give you more details. And also in my Twitter, I have published about this, so you can follow me on my Twitter too.
Thanks. I think there's one more, and I have one as well.
Okay.
This is from anonymous attendee. Where do you think VR technology is going to play a major role in IoT, into Internet of Things?
Yeah, I think similar to what I shown in the cardio that you see the heart rate of a person, that's something that you cannot see with bare eyes. I think IoT is something that you cannot see with bare eyes. You're currently using your phone, and there is one app for everything, and then you check like the temperature in your room or something through there. I think that if you can have it in a more spatial way than having to go through the screen, that's clear. That and Valentin Hoyne has been working on this type of work, and he has very cool things on how to interact with them.
Great. My question is, just can you say a bit more about what happens if you're looking at someone and you see their heart beating? What did you get any qualitative feedback about that or anything?
Well, we wanted to do a study there about the physiological mirroring. Of course, this is the first thing that comes into mind, right? It's kind of a thing that people synchronize on physiological level very nicely. From very extreme things like women who live together tend to have their periods at the same time. That's kind of super strong synchronization. But even on an interview for a job, if you synchronize your heart rate and respiration, you're more likely to match and to get along well. And I think, yes, I wanted to do something around that, but we never got to finish because sometimes research that give you the results and you're like, okay, we're stopping this because it doesn't give, it's not significant or something is wrong with your setup, and maybe we'll retake it in some time and continue with that.
Thanks. And Dorothy Cowie says, and this is my also my way of summing up, is that this was a masterclass. Thank you. And there's many other positive messages that I guess you can read later that are comments on the YouTube stream. So it's really great to see you, and thanks very much for a really interesting, wide-ranging talk that's covered all the fantastic things you've done over the years. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Mel. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Oh, you're going to make an announcement for next time?
Yes. Sorry, I forgot to announce the next meetings. Yeah. First of all, I'd like to thank, as you've just seen, the extremely helpful Dr. Sylvia Pan, who's producing things behind the scenes in making everything work technically. Tomorrow we have Professor Massimo Bergamasco at 3 o'clock CEST, that's Brussels time, who's going to talk about haptic interaction in virtual reality. That's tomorrow at 3 o'clock, Central European summertime. And on Monday, Albert Skip Rizzo is going to talk on virtual reality exposure for post-traumatic stress disorder. That's the 8th of June at 6 o'clock, again, Brussels time, Central European summertime. So I think with that, we can close the meeting, and thanks for everyone.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to stop the live. Wait.